Hi everybody, today I want to talk about corsets and more specifically some people's dependence on corsets. There is this false theory going around that once you start wearing a corset you can never stop wearing it for the rest of your life, and I really feel that this statement has been misconstrued. I think it's basically another case of broken telephone where the meaning was really lost in it. It was blown out of proportion, and I don't think it really applies to modern tight lacers or corset wearers today. As many of you know, a couple of weeks ago I bruised my side and I'm not able to wear my corsets at the moment because I want to make sure that I'm completely healed up. So it's going to be a little bit while yet before I can start lacing up again. But over the last couple of weeks, I realized that I really missed the hug of a corset, and that sort of intrigued me. As some of you know, if you've been following me long enough, I've been waist training from about mid-2010 to about mid-2013, and that was pretty regularly. I took breaks when I got a cold or bronchitis or something like that, but once that cleared up, I resumed waist training again. And then in mid-2013, I realized that I actually didn't really like my silhouette at 20 inches, and so I backed off a little bit and I just kept lacing between 22 and 24 inches. I think that proportion looks nice with my body. So that's basically what I've been doing for the last year and a half. I've been wearing them, almost daily still, because I still have to break in a lot of corsets for preparation of my reviews, but I basically wear them whenever I want to, and I don't have a specific goal. But when the option or the ability to wear a corset was taken away from me because I fell and bruised my side, and I don't want to do anything that's painful or injurious to myself, I realized that I really missed wearing the corset. And I spent some time thinking about this, whether it was a psychological or an emotional dependence, and if it has anything specifically to do with the corset, or if it was simply the fact that I was denied being able to do something as kind of like forbidden fruit. I've talked at length before about corsets and deep pressure therapy that they can provide, as well as changing your posture and affecting your confidence level, and this is actually independent of a figure shaping aspect or not. But if you are a waist trainer or a tight lacer or a lifestyle corseter in any way, I think it's important to, at least once in a while, just gauge yourself and make sure that you're still corseting for the right reasons. Have you achieved your goal, or is your goal even attainable? And if you are using it as an aid for something like deep pressure therapy, make sure that it is staying as an aid that is helping you and not becoming a crutch that you can't function without. Quite often people write me and they tell me their stories about how they discovered corsets or what it's done for them, and it really warms my heart when people tell me that, say they were agoraphobic and wearing a corset felt like a piece of armor to them, and they were able to actually go outside and socialize and run errands and not have a panic attack in public, and I think that is just phenomenal. But I also think it's important to note that some people can become addicted to the feeling or the look of corsets, the same way that some people might be addicted to buying shoes or following a certain TV series or eating a certain food. And of course, certain foods and drugs, they do actually have addictive properties, but I think that somebody's personality also has a factor in whether they become addicted to something or not. And I see people sort of poking fun at dependence in marketing campaigns, kind of like with Lay's chips, you can't eat just one. And obviously that's meant to be a joke. They're sort of like playing on, oh yeah, it's delicious, it's crispy, of course you can't stop at just one chip. But I very much doubt that somebody would take that and blow it out of proportion and say, oh my gosh, like if I have just one Lay's chip, I'm going to have this horrible circular experience of just eating bag after bag of Lay's chips until the day I die. And I think that a lot of people who are not experienced with corsets, they hear somebody say, oh, once you start wearing corsets, you can't stop. I think that that sort of more negative connotation is where their mind automatically jumps to, as opposed to that sort of Lay's analogy. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of news headlines that are really sensationalist about corsets regarding Penny Brown and Kelly Lee DeKay and Michele. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. And people who are there that are saying they can't eat regular meals anymore. Their bodies are unable to handle solid food, and they can't even stand up by themselves. And they've worn a corset for so long that they can't go without their corset ever. And the people who write these stories specifically choose certain adjectives to associate with these tight lacers. For instance, obsessed and addicted, when the tight lacers themselves might have said that they are dedicated or disciplined. It's kind of amazing how the change of one adjective can blow something completely out of proportion. But I do want to touch on physical dependence on a corset, because it is actually possible that if you wear your corset for a very long time without doing any sort of core resistance training to keep your abs and your back toned, you can experience some muscle atrophy. And I've talked about corsets and what it does to your muscles in another video, so I'll link it right up there. The media like to say that very accomplished waist trainers like Ethel Granger, Kathy Young, Michele, that they could never go without their corset ever again, that they have trouble even standing up on their own without a corset. And you know, I've done research on this. I can't find any medical record where somebody has worn a corset and then they took off their corset and they just flopped over or snapped in half. You know, I might believe it if I actually read it in a medical journal, but I haven't. Kathy Young clearly takes off her corset to shower, and if I remember correctly in an interview, I think she said that when she takes off her corset, obviously it's tiring. She's tired without the support of a corset. And in the case of Michele, she said in an interview that when she changes her corsets, when she takes one off and puts one on, she said that it makes her kind of winded. But in that same segment, they said that Michele was not able to stand up on her own without a corset, and in that same segment, just a couple of minutes earlier, she was clearly standing up without a corset in front of the camera. Like, you could clearly see it. So what the narrator is saying in the video is actually a contradiction to what is actually happening in the video. But a more recent video with Michele actually came out, since she has stopped waist training for at least 6 months now, I believe. And it shows her walking around, moving around without her corset. Her waist has expanded to what is, I guess, average now, and she can't get into her old corset at all. It seems that she has regained her muscle tone completely, and that is after wearing a corset for at least 23 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 3 to 4 years. So obviously the effects can be reversible. Which brings me to my last point, and that is the notion that once you start wearing a corset you can't stop. That might actually be in reference to not any sort of physical dependence or emotional dependence, but it might be in reference to the fact that if you waist train for a while and then you stop cold turkey, you may lose your progress, you may lose your results. And a lot of people hear this and they are discouraged. They say, well, what's the point of waist training if you have to do it and you have to maintain the results? Well, it's the same with anything else. If you build yourself up for a bodybuilding competition and then after the competition you stop weight training and bulking up, then you're going to get softer, your muscles are going to get smaller. If you go on a diet to lose all this weight, and then once you reach your goal weight, then you sort of take on very unhealthy eating habits, you're eating a lot of junk food and everything, then you can't expect to maintain the results you had before. Your weight might creep up again. And with the same as flexibility, you have to keep stretching if you want to maintain that flexibility. And it's the same with waist training. If you wear a corset 6 days a week for say 6 months or a year, you may see a change in your natural uncorseted waist. It might be a different shape, it might be a few inches smaller than it was before, but if you stop wearing a corset cold turkey, you can expect that your waist is going to gradually expand again. How long it takes for your body to expand, that I can't tell you. It depends on the individual, just kind of like I can't tell you how fast it will take for you to achieve your goal. But even if you were to train your rib cage, and bones take a long time to move and they're very slow, but that sort of results are more permanent than affecting your soft tissue. But if you were to become pregnant and the baby pushes out your rib cage, that is the loss of progress from your waist training. So that's why I always say that the effects of waist training are semi-permanent. An amputation is permanent, but waist training is for the most part semi-permanent. You can't expect to have the same hourglass figure at 70 years old than you do, if you're 25 and just waist trained. And this is not the first time I'm saying this sort of thing. If you modify your body in some way, there is probably a level of maintenance that's going to be required if you want to keep those results. So that would be one interpretation of the idea that once you start wearing a corset, you can't stop. Otherwise, you will lose the results that you might have gotten, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to develop a psychological or emotional or physical dependence on the corset. So that's all that I wanted to say about this topic. What do you think about corsets and dependence? Have you experienced it before or not? Leave me a comment down below, and I will see you next week for another video. Bye.